What's up, YouTube? Scott here with the Carrera Cafe, and today I've got a really exciting one for you guys. We're doing the Flat 6 Face-Off. We're going to be comparing my 1985 3.2 Carrera to this 1995 993. I'm really excited about this one. If you've been following along on the channel, you'll know that I've had this 3.2 for a little over a year now. And you could consider the 993 to be the younger brother. It's 10 years ahead and 2 generations ahead. I've never driven a 993, but I'm told it takes everything that is great about the air-cooled experience and turns it up a notch with some additional technology and modern conveniences. So my goal for this video is maybe if you're out there trying to decide if the 993 is worth the extra money, this video is designed to help you make that decision. Or maybe you're just interested in air-cooled 911 ownership. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and let's get behind the wheel and I'll give you guys my thoughts. All right, behind the wheel of the 993. So again, I've never driven a 993 until today, so this is my first experience with one of these. My expectations are high, thanks to the Porsche community. So just a little bit of history and kind of some numbers on the 993. So this makes about 280 horsepower. So that is about 70 horsepower more than my 3.2 Carrera. So I have a feeling we're gonna notice that power difference. Ooh, there's the sound. I can already tell I'm gonna like this. So the 993 is essentially the last air-cooled generation that Porsche produced before the red-headed stepchild 996 came into the picture, which I've actually owned a 996 C4S, and I don't think it's as bad as everybody says it is, as long as you just look at it from the rear 3/4. So this was the last air-cooled Porsche, essentially. So what that means is we should have the best blend of modern-ish technology, yet that air-cooled performance experience. I can already tell that this is just so much easier to drive than my 3.2 Carrera. So one of the things I noticed right out of the gate is just drivability. My 3.2 is a little bit more dramatic in terms of how much attention it needs. I can get in this, and I've not spent very much time with this vehicle at all, and I can tell where the gears are, clutch. This is just very easy to drive. Something that's different about the 993 is it is a 6-speed versus the 5-speed that you would have found in the 3.2. In the 3.2 you could get a 915 or a G50 depending on the year, but the 993 came in a 6-speed, so it is a little different. That reverse is up all the way to the left in this, and reverse is all the way down to the right in mine. One of the other major differences I noticed right out of the gate when driving is this has power assisted steering. So my 3.2 Carrera it has no power steering, so it does require all the input. This is a really good balance. I mean, this is still very connected, yet cruising around parking lot speeds is, you're not going to throw your shoulder out. I can also tell the interior is, although it looks very similar in here, I do think there are quite a bit of differences. I can tell that there is more insulation in this vehicle. This is a more comfortable place to be. It's got better climate. If you're familiar with some of the old air-cooled 911s, the HVAC, the air conditioning got better over time. 993's got bigger vents, much more straightforward controls for heating and cooling. My 3.2 is kind of broken up into 3 different categories, which I'll talk about when we drive it. But if I was going to cross country a 911, I would probably prefer this over my 3.2 because although it's still air-cooled and giving me that kind of raw driving experience, it is a lot more comfortable in here. I could totally see this being something that somebody did daily drive back in the day, and even now. You know, if you're you're not worried about the miles and some of the risk of being out on those daily driving roads. One of the other major differences in this vehicle is Porsche updated the suspension. So all of the original 911s, like my 3.2, they have a traditional torsion bar on the rear, which is crazy to think that you can get that good of a driving experience with all that weight and those older torsion bars. This moved to a multi-linkage system with traditional coils. So the suspension in this car is a lot more modern, and I can definitely tell when I'm driving it's doing a lot better over some of these bumps because it doesn't have those torsion bars like I have in mind. I just love the size and the weight of all these 911s. I mean, you can't go wrong with either of these. Oh, the brakes are so much nicer in this vehicle. It's one of the other major differences mechanically, is these do have assisted brakes. Yeah, I mean, these bite. I saw this had some drilled and slotted rotors, so I don't know if they're OEM spec or not. This vehicle is on loaner to us from a local PCA member. He does some detailing and has paint corrected and ceramic coated some of my vehicles. And he reached out when he saw the channel and said, hey, you want to drive my 993? And of course I said, absolutely, because I have not really spent any time in these. One of the other interesting differences that you wouldn't necessarily think about, so from an electronics perspective, this vehicle's got OBD. You know, you can hook a traditional OBD computer into this for diagnostics, and this thing has a bunch of dash lights, right? Different warning lights for different systems. My 3.2 Carrera does not have that, so it's taught me some troubleshooting and process of elimination skills. In the old 911 that I have, I use a multimeter to pretty much troubleshoot anything. You know, you're measuring before and after sensors and making sure that readings are inside of a certain spec based on temperature. This vehicle's probably easier to diagnose things because of the OBD. So it's kind of just what you prefer. You know, if you're going to have an indie shop work on them, it's probably not that important to you. But I kind of enjoy the tinkering aspect. At first, I was a little lost without an OBD port to pull codes and things. But I've kind of learned to enjoy the process of older process of elimination and troubleshooting with just a multimeter. So. This vehicle does have some aftermarket wheels and some big old tires on it. Pfister mufflers, Bilstein struts. These vehicles would have come with either a set of Cup 2s or some turbo twists. I certainly have a soft spot for the turbo twists. I had them on my 996, and I just think they're a great looking wheel. All right, so we're kind of getting to the more open spot of our drive here, so I'm going to shut up and do some driving. There's those squeaky brakes for us. Oh, I love the sound of that Pfister exhaust. So I definitely notice in these corners the suspension. It does feel more planted than my torsion bars do, and I can definitely tell a difference in power. Wow, this thing is easy to shift and drive. Oh, some little backfire there. Oh yeah, there we go. So initial thoughts. It's a little less dramatic than my 3.2. It's definitely more refined. It's significantly easier to drive. I mean, like I said, if I was going to be driving a long distance, maybe on some of these Porsche rallies with the PCA, this is probably a much more enjoyable long-term experience for those types of drives. But it isn't quite as visceral and raw as my 3.2 is. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just different. It is so easy to drive. I mean, Porsche just kept refining and building upon this great platform, and you can definitely tell this is the mixture of all that hard work with a little bit of technology dabbled on top of it. It is a really great place to be. So we'll start with a little bit of a background on the 3.2. So the 3.2 came after the 911 SC. The SC would have had a 3.0 liter flat six. The 3.2 was introduced in 1984. So now we've got more power, slightly larger displacement, and a Motronic system for essentially electronically controlled fuel and timing for a little bit more performance. The 3.2 came in a 5-speed. It was either the 915 gearbox in the earlier generations like mine, or the G50 in the later iterations. It's kind of widely accepted that the G50 is a better experience. I do think everybody has their own opinion. I actually prefer a well-sorted 915. I think it's a little bit more involved. So this has been my weekend cruiser for just over a year. I've put almost 7,000 miles on it, so it is not a garage queen. So I've got plenty of seat time in here, and I've got a lot of experience driving this vehicle. So there are some immediate things. Wow, somebody's squealing some tires. So there are some immediate things right out of the gate that I noticed that are different between this and a 993. From the obvious things that you can find on paper, right? Obviously, the 993, slightly larger engine. It has a 3.6 liter flat six, making about 60 more horsepower. But the driving experience is quite a bit different. Although the vehicles look the same and they have very similar proportions and weight, it is actually quite a bit a different driving experience, which is surprising to me, actually. I was thinking the 993 was going to just be almost the same experience, just more power, and it's actually far from that, in a good way, actually. I think they are different vehicles more than I was thinking. They share less in common than I was thinking. So one of the things that's unique about these older 911s, very confusing climate control system in here. Best way that I can describe it to anybody is the section on the dash, that's just for outside air, right? So that's defrost or bringing air into the cabin from the outside. Down here by the shifter, this is air conditioning. It has nothing to do with the stack in the middle. This is just for your air conditioning. And then down here is just for the heat, right? This opens and closes the flaps to bring heat in from the heat exchangers. And then there's a knob to turn the speed up on the pump. And in my experience, that pump only comes on above a certain RPM. So when at idle, my vehicle's not pumping heat using that motor back there. 993 is much more simplified, single control for all of your heat, cool, and outside air, and somebody's going to be a lot more comfortable with that when coming from a more modern vehicle. One of the other big things that you'll notice when you're driving these cars is my clutch is cable driven. So there's literally a cable from the clutch pedal running to the clutch, and it's engaging and disengaging. The 993 is not a mechanical clutch. I believe it is a hydraulic clutch. One of the other big things that I notice right out of the gate is obviously the steering. So this has been my first vehicle without power steering. I've owned a lot of different sports cars, but nothing this old. Most of it was 90s, 2000s. So getting in this with no power steering took a bit to get used to at first. You know, you got to be a little intentional with your driving, right? You shouldn't be cranking your wheel when you're not rolling anyway. We all know that. But parking lot speeds, it does require some elbow grease to get this thing moving. But what you get in exchange for that effort is a very awesome driving experience in the corners, because the feedback is just so natural. The 993's steering is assisted, so it's helping with those inputs. It's still very connected, but it is assisting with some of those inputs. One of the downsides of the 3.2, in my opinion, at least in its factory form, are the brakes. There's not a whole lot of great brake feeling and feedback. You could obviously upgrade the brakes on these to provide a better experience. That's one thing that stands out to me on the 993 is I do get a lot more confidence when braking into a corner. Sometimes this 3.2 kind of feels like you're just pushing a 2x4, especially once they get hot and you've been really beating on them, you get some brake fade. But I mentioned this when driving the 993. These people tend to kind of just lump these interiors together, and I agree with some of that. The overall concept is obviously the same. We've got the 5-cluster layout, a very flat dash, but I did notice some quality enhancements in the 993. The doors felt heavier. It seemed like there was more insulation. There were bigger vents for the HVAC, which you could have gotten in the 3.2 in later years as well. But it did feel newer. I could tell speaker placement was in different locations. You know, I think Porsche did a really good job at building on what they worked on for the last 20 years or 30 years on the 911, and then bringing it into a more modern era in the 90s. One of the things that I've heard complaints about, and I think the one that I drove today had a delete, but the 993 could have been optioned with an immobilizer, kind of like an alarm system, and it's a little wonky. You know, you have to disable it before you start it. So some people do a delete on those for the immobilizer. Just an example of Porsche trying to introduce some conveniences, you know, keyless entry and an alarm system, because other luxury brands in the 90s were starting to do that. Now, it's a little bit of an unfair comparison because my exhaust is quite a bit louder than the 993 we just drove. That 993 did have a Pfister muffler modification. My vehicle has the Dank Sport muffler and some type of higher flow cat that predates my ownership. I don't necessarily have details on it. Another good example of a modern convenience that you forget about is cruise control. My 3.2 does not have cruise control. That 993 had cruise control, which would be nice on a long run rally, right? If you're going to drive cross country and cruise on the highway for a while, at some point you probably would like to cruise at a speed and just kind of forget about everything else. These older 3.2s, at least mine, does not have cruise control. I don't know if the later ones could have been optioned with it. Let's talk a little bit about design, because I think that's obviously one of the big separators between this and the 993. So the 993, they did kind of soften some of the lines. You know, that the arches on the front where the headlights are a little softer on the 993. The headlights are a little more flat, and they're upgraded to a projector beam style headlight to kind of keep up with the times. But I do think that the 993s have a slightly different hip shape than the 3.2. So on the 993, you could get wider hips with an S or a turbo, but even the base still has a wider looking hip, I feel like. That body line is just different than on the 3.2. I drive a narrow body 3.2, but I'd love the extra, inch and a half that you get with the turbo fenders. I think it just looks really aggressive. So the body lines are a little different. The 993 introduced active aero. I believe that was really in the 964 for the first time. I think probably started on the track vehicle, but The 993 has a wing that goes up and down either manually or based on your speed, I think around 48 miles an hour or so. So it's cool that they'd already introduced active aero in the 90s, which is, I'm sure, was a pretty big leap in advancement back then. Obviously my 3.2's got a fixed whale tail. These could have been optioned with or without, and then a lot of people are putting whale tails on them secondhand. I do have a factory whale tail on mine. It was spec'd that way. All right, we're getting to kind of the more open part of the drive here, and per usual, I'm gonna try to not talk and just do some driving for you guys so you can hear it and definitely notice the difference in power. The 993 does have more power, and I can feel it coming out of these corners. Not that the 3.2 is, you know, slow. Both of these cars are not high performance by modern standards, but they are both, you know, Miata fast. You can have plenty of fun in the corners. You don't need 500 horsepower to put a smile on your face. Just like the 993, second gear is pretty long. Most of this drive, I'm just going between second and third. Oh, I just love the feeling of this steering, no assist. If I had to pick one, I think I prefer the no power steering. But I like the power assisted brakes in the 993. I've been driving this thing a lot for a year, and it still puts a smile on my face every time I drive it. Shifting action, definitely easier to drive that 993. This car is a little difficult to rev match. You got to spend some time with it. That 993, I immediately was able to hop in, rev match, find the gears real easy. This car does make you work for it, and I mean, you can attribute that a lot to just advancements in automotive technology in 10 years, right? I mean, there are 10 years between these two vehicles. And I think it was a well-used 10 years, you know? I look at a 2015 vehicle and compare it to a 2025, and I wouldn't say there's a lot of great progression in that 10-year span. You know, of course, there was safety advancements, but a lot of manufacturers just put unnecessary technology in them, in vehicles. They lost quality control, and there's just plastics and, you know, this kind of planned obsolescence thing they got going on. Porsche, from 85 to 95, really took the air-cooled experience and just continued to improve upon it, right? I think that was a well-spent 10 years of engineering and development, right? So let's kind of summarize, and this is going to be difficult for me to do because I want to avoid pushing my opinion on people, and I want to give you guys an unbiased look at both of these vehicles. Let me start by saying you can't go wrong with any air-cooled 911. You know, all the generations are unique in their own way. I do think that the 993, like everybody would expect, is the most refined way to own and drive an air-cooled 911, right? But in exchange for that higher level of refinement, it does lack a little bit of drama. And what I mean by that is it's a double-edged sword. It's easy to drive. I can get in, I fires right up. It idled really smooth right out of the gate. It feels more like a modern Porsche. I get in my 3.2 and I fire it up, the RPM's raise, and then kind of it settles out. You know, the gearbox is shifting differently based on its temperature. You know, I get out of this car smelling kind of like muscle car, and I attribute some of that to my exhaust. You get out of the 993 and I can walk into a meeting during the day and someone's not going to be like, hey, were you driving an old muscle car by chance? Both of them are wonderful driving experiences. I think it depends how much drama, how much connection are you looking for. I think the 993 could have been I could definitely see somebody daily driving that from an enthusiast perspective. People that daily drive a 3.2, I mean, they got to really like the experience, right? There are sacrifices that we make in here as far as suspension, brakes, steering, HVAC, where those things could become an inconvenience when you're not out driving just to drive, right? Now, the 993 market has always been, you know, higher than the 3.2s. There's always been a gap between them. I think we're going to continue to see that gap because everybody knows the 993 was the last air-cooled Porsche before they, you know, brought in this god-awful water-cooled Porsche technology to create more power, right? There was no way that air-cooled was going to be the long-term solution, right? It's just too expensive, too challenging to produce more power without some cooling, right? But it's tough to spit out exact dollars. You know, I'm perusing Bring a Trailer and Cars and Bids all day long, even though I'm not actually in the market for a 911. And it seems like in general, when you're comparing base model to base model, I think you're going to spend anywhere from 20 to 30% more on a 993. But you get a 10-year newer vehicle with a lot of modern conveniences, and you're not sacrificing, you know, the air-cooled driving experience. So I would encourage anybody to get out and drive both and see what they prefer. Quite frankly, I would almost suggest driving multiple of each, because what's interesting is not all 3.2s drive the same. So I gotta imagine all 993s don't drive the same either. It's all about how they've been taken care of, what's been done to them. So get out and drive a couple and see for yourself which experience you prefer more. I think for the amount of money that I have invested in my 3.2, I don't think I would personally pay to replace my 3.2 with a 993, unless it was maybe a higher trim 993. But now we're talking buku money at that point. You know, if I was going to jump to a 993 or even a 964, I'd really want a turbo, I think, just because the cost difference for me isn't changing what I enjoy about the car enough. When I get in and drive my 3.2, it's because I want to drive, right? I want to shift the gears. I want to feel the road. I want to smell it, hear it. Man, this thing's fun to drive. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching. If you're new here, this is the Carrera Cafe. My goal is to bring you informative Porsche content around ownership and DIYs, or about just other vehicles in my garage. I currently have two Lexus SUVs, a GX460 and an LX570, and I've been making content about those as well. I am working on some partnerships here in town with dealerships as well to give you guys access to other inventory. So I appreciate you guys following along. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing, as it really helps the channel. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.